Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural edition of Beyond Your Balance Sheet, a series sponsored by the Sedoric Group of Steward Partners. I'm Laura Canoy. This series will examine mental and physical wellness as a critical part of financial outlook and financial health. Our guest today is John Broderick, Senior Director of External Affairs at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. John Broderick has had a career full of highlights that impress. A top litigator, prominent judge, Chief Justice of the New Hampshire State Supreme Court, founder of a leading public policy center at the University of New Hampshire Law School. But now, in his early 70s, he says he's doing his life's most important work, talking about mental health. He knows the topic firsthand from the struggles of his eldest son. Master's educated and talented, Christian Broderick had unrecognized and untreated depression and anxiety. Christian self-medicated with alcohol, as many people do who are suffering with mental health challenges and who think it's just them. Not seeing what was really bringing dysfunction to their son, circumstances spiraled downward and took the Broderick family on a very challenging and very public journey through despair and hopelessness. Ultimately, the choices and mistakes they made took the Chief Justice to the ICU and his son to the state prison. As Chief Justice Broderick says, through the grace of God and the skill of a lot of good people, we came to understand what was plaguing our son and the mistakes we all made. They have now healed as a family and are committed to sharing their cautionary tale to help others. Toward that end, John Broderick has traveled almost 90,000 miles on back roads and interstate highways in northern New England in all kinds of our region's famous weather. Over the course of 5 years, he's spoken to tens of thousands of middle school and high school students at more than 250 gyms and auditoriums. And the conversations he's had with kids afterwards have left him even more convinced that, as he puts it, something must change. This hour, we're going to talk with Chief Justice Broderick about what he's learned from his nearly 5 years of evangelizing on this topic, what impact he hopes his work has had, and what more he'd like to see change. We'll also explore what it means to have such a rich, meaningful encore career and hear his thoughts about the deep power of forgiveness. Alongside our interview today, we've provided links to Justice Broderick's presentation, this one recorded at Dartmouth College. We also have links to the groups he works with to raise awareness and respond to mental illness. The Sedoric Group of Steward Partners, a wealth management firm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, is sponsoring this conversation series as part of its wider goal to help clients live fulfilling lives. The Sedoric Group believes creating successful monetary outcomes is a multidimensional equation. As planners, they help clients achieve success by working with the numbers, but accumulating financial resources is only part of the puzzle. To help someone achieve true fulfillment, they recognize the importance of the client's mind, body, heart, and soul, not just their balance sheet. The mental health crisis, in many respects, is the elephant in the room because how it touches just about every family. Chief Justice Broderick, welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond Your Balance Sheet. It's a real pleasure to talk to you again.
Laura, thank you. It's great to be with you again.
Well, you often open your presentations, including the one that is attached to this interview, by appealing to the audience, Justice Broderick, saying, I need your help. I need your help changing the conversation about mental illness. Now, it does seem there's a lot more awareness and understanding of mental health these days. So what more needs to change?
So much needs to change, Laura. I've spent the last 5 years of my life, most of my waking hours, by the way, with the help of Dartmouth-Hitchcock, speaking, as you pointed out, at middle schools and high schools, and to tens of thousands of adult groups as well. The number of people, Laura, who approach me after I talk, not about me, but it's about this topic, who open up about their own mental health journey, the stigma they feel, the shame they feel, how they're not able to communicate it to others. There's an enormous amount of ignorance about mental health. I was part of the problem for most of my life. I'm not part of the problem now, but I was, so I don't want to sound too righteous. But we need to normalize it, destigmatize it, demythologize it, and finally talk about it. And we've got a long way to go for that to happen in everyday life.
So When I say what more needs to change, is it kind of everything, Justice Broderick? We need to talk about it. We need to destigmatize it. We need to better understand it. Is that what needs to change?
Yes, it is hard. We need to normalize it. Now, people today, not always, by the way, but when I was much younger, people used to whisper the word cancer. My mother used to whisper the word cancer. Some people weren't brave enough to even do that. They would say he or she has the C word. When the AIDS epidemic broke out in the 80s, we stigmatized and ostracized those people until Magic Johnson told us in 1991 that he had HIV, and we didn't want to lose Magic. And so everything changed. It was that way at one time for heart disease or dementia or ALS. And thank goodness we've grown up. And we now deal with breast cancer in a way that we never did for much of my life. And all of that is positive and good. And we have systems to deal with all of those medical issues. We don't have a mental health system in the United States. And in my view, Laura, we never will. And people are willing to finally talk about it in the sunlight.
Why do you think that is, Justice Broderick? You talked about all the changes that we've seen with other health conditions, AIDS and breast cancer. Certainly, you're right. People used to not even want to say those words. Why hasn't the conversation changed when it comes to mental illness? And if I could add on, what small bits of change do you see? For example, we've seen major athletes now coming out talking about their mental health.
Yes.
So go
Well,
ahead. Yeah.
all of that is helpful, Laura. It's all positive. I agree with you. But mental illness has always been treated for most of its life and for most of my life as a personal weakness, a character flaw. People say to people suffering from depression, oh, snap out of it. They don't say that to people with diabetes. Uh, when you have a mental health problem, you become your illness. You are mentally ill, not you're a person dealing with a mental health challenge. It comes from a place where 100 years ago, people were put in insane asylums. That's what we call them, lunatic asylums. That's the history of it. And before that, it was seen as almost like a demonic possession. So people are very frightened by it. They don't really understand it. And they may be, a lot of people may be like I was, which is I wouldn't have known it if I tripped over it unless it was at the extreme. And I thought for much of my life, I don't now, that all mental health problems were essentially lifelong and hopeless and untreatable. I don't feel that way now. But we don't have a system, or we don't have psychiatrists and social workers and psychiatric nurse practitioners. And it's because we allow that, not because it has to be that way. And so we need to normalize it. People need to be free to talk about it like this generation is. I love these kids, by the way. These kids will change it, but we need to hasten the change.
Well, and let's talk a little bit more about the young people who come up to you, as you said, after your presentations, they confide in you. You've lost count of how many hugs you've gotten from the middle schoolers and high schools that have come up to you afterwards. What are they sharing with you, Justice Broderick? What kind of stories?
It's pretty extraordinary and very humbling. I feel a fiduciary duty to these kids. Maybe I have no right to, but I do. I spoke just 2 weeks ago in Maine, Laura. I'll give you an example. My talk lasts 35, 40 minutes. I stay as long as there are kids who want to talk. And I stayed 90 minutes after that
Wow.
talk. And some
Wow.
of the people who came through the line were varsity athletes. Some of them were crying. Often they say, can I hug you? Thanks for sticking up for kids like me. I'm ashamed of my mental illness. Sometimes they say, I've told my parents, but they don't believe in mental health problems. Half the kids I see, because I ask them, are you getting help anywhere? And half of them aren't getting help anywhere. I've hugged kids in every state in New England who have told me they have attempted suicide or they want to kill themselves. You can't have those experiences, Laura, day after day, week after week, and not think we're not dealing with this very effectively. Part of the problem is the larger culture around us and the parents. Parents are good parents. I'm not saying other than that. But we are blind to certain things. because they're uncomfortable, or in my case, I was just really ignorant about mental illness. But it's a topic that people are reluctant to touch because they don't know where it's going, they don't know whether they'll be blamed for it, and they don't know what to do or how to get treatment if they can. What we need to be doing, Laura, is listening to young people. These kids have a lot of these problems, but the kids are not the problem. And I've realized that over the 5 years. We owe them more than we're giving them. But so that it's not lost on us, it's not just kids who are suffering. I've been at schools, by the way, Laura, where teachers have waited to come up to me at the end. Sometimes they hug me. Sometimes they're crying. They say, I've never told anyone about my depression. We shouldn't have that exist, but it's existing everywhere. We need to change it.
In addition to middle and high school students, I'd love to hear about your talk earlier this fall to college students at Franklin Pierce University. You had some moving experiences there, Justice Broderick. Tell us about that, please.
I spoke, they asked me to come over, I spoke to every varsity athlete at Franklin Pierce College. I didn't know they had so many athletes. I did say to them before I started, I said, I've never spoken to this many physically fit people in one place at one time my whole life. I felt so insecure in their presence. But I gave them the talk that I usually give. And these are pretty secure people, as you might imagine, pretty successful, the popular students on campus. But they would come up afterwards and they would share. Two students, one was a freshman and one was a senior. The senior was a football player. He looked like he should be playing for the Patriots. And he told me with wet eyes that he had lost his closest friend to suicide 6 weeks earlier. The freshman girl came up and she said, just a few weeks ago, my dearest friend took her own life. I mean, there's no answer for that, Laura, in those brief exchanges. I just hug them. It impacts me every time I go out. And the fact that kids will open up to someone they don't know, and the only reason they do it is because by the time I finish speaking, I'm vulnerable too. And they know that I won't judge them or blame them or shame them, and that I will understand that it's not them, it's a health issue. That's all it takes. But in the broader culture, of which I was a part for many decades, and so I was part of the problem. The broader culture is not understanding of that. It just isn't. And so that's what I'm intent on changing. I'm also intent now, more than ever before, in having people understand that we don't have a treatment system for mental health problems in America, and we should.
You know, you mentioned those two athletes, people who looked like they should, you know, um, have it all together, be perfectly fine, the popular kids, as you said, and yet they came up with their own stories. And many studies and surveys in recent years, you know this, Justice Broderick, show alarming rises in youth suicide, in mental health issues. What statistics are you looking at there? What jumps out the most to you when you look at those studies and surveys?
Let me share these. These are troubling statistics and largely invisible, by the way. The Center for Disease Control every 2 years issues questionnaires, about 80 questions, to public high schools around the country. In 2019, the most recent one, 70 high schools in New Hampshire had their students answer the question. There are about 85 high schools, so it's a good return here. They're anonymous, so you just put down your age, your sex, and your year in school. That's all you provide. Of the 80 questions, about 4 of them relate to mental health. Here are the national averages. 2019, before COVID, 46.6% of high school girls in the United States are depressed. It doesn't say, are you depressed? It says, have you been sad or hopeless for 2 consecutive weeks or longer? In the last 12 months, those have been able to engage in normal everyday activity, 46.6%. 26% of high school boys, 26% of high school girls in the United States have given serious consideration, that's the question, to taking their own lives in the last 12 months. 15% said they've made plans to do that. And nationally, 11% of high school girls attempted suicide 1 or more times. the numbers are alarming. In New Hampshire, the numbers are similar. In New Hampshire, 8.3% of high school girls attempted suicide one or more times. From 2007, Laura, to 2017, according to the Center for Disease Control, the rate of suicide, people ages 10 to 24, kind of the wonder years of life, the rate of suicide in that age bracket increased 56% over that time.
56%, Justice Broderick.
And that's not just happening for no reason. We
Yeah,
lose
what
a
do you think
veteran.
is driving this? Yeah, what do you think is behind that? That's alarming.
I tell you, Laura, I'm not a clinician, but I'm a pretty good listener and pretty good observer. And I know what kids have said. There are a lot of reasons behind mental health problems, and I don't tend to provide the silver bullet. But I believe a lot of the anxiety and depression that I hug every time I go out is social cultural in origin. These kids that I'm talking to are on iPhones, iPads, and electronics anywhere from 5 to 8 hours a day. 80% of America's youth get less than 8 hours of sleep a night. These kids are living in a pressure cooker. We are shortening childhood in the United States, unintentionally, but we're shortening it. These kids are over-structured, over-expected, over-organized. If you said to most 10-year-old kids today, why don't you go out and play? They would say, play what? They might say, is that an app? Where do I get that app? Give you an example of the pressure these kids feel that I did not feel. I spoke on Nantucket about 2 weeks ago. I was speaking to 7th and 8th grade kids, and I asked these 3 questions. How many of you are not happy enough in your life? These are 7th and 8th graders. 40% of the hands went up. How many of you think mom or dad are on their technology too much at night? 60% of the hands went up.
Oh, wow.
Then I said to them, if I could promise all of you, 7th and 8th graders, an 89 on your next test, and you wouldn't have to study anymore, you'd get an 89. Or you could study all night long and get a 90. How many of you would study all night long? Every single hand went up. And then a little boy raised his hand. He said, what would I have to do to get 100 on that test? I said, that's not one of the options in my question. If you had said to me when I was in the 7th grade, John, I guarantee you an 89 on your next math test, where you can study all night and you get a 90, I would have found a basketball and gone and played hoop.
So you're saying it's societal pressure, parental
I think
pressure?
there's enormous pressure to succeed, Laura. I had a girl at high school in Maine. She looked so sad. She was a junior, and she said, I'm in all advanced placement classes here. And I was trying to make her smile. I said, there should be a law against people like you. No one should be that smart. And she said, it's not that good. I said, what do you mean? She said, I have no life. She said, I study every night till 11:30 at night. I said, why are you doing that? She said, to please my parents. I said, I don't know your parents, but I'm sure they love you very much. Maybe you should tell them what you're telling me. I'm a perfect stranger. Maybe you should tell your parents what you just told me. Will you do that? And she didn't answer. She stepped closer to me, gave me a hug, and then ran down the hallway. I guarantee you she never told her parents. I see that over and over and over again. Every time you see kids out playing, at least in my experience, they all have uniforms and coaches, and they're organized. My childhood was not organized. I benefited, Laura. My social emotional growth, I attribute to the inefficient use of time. That's what I did. That was my childhood. We had family dinners every night. They weren't 5-star meals. I'm a middle-class kid, but I knew all my neighbors. I'd been through all their houses. I played with my friends. We made up games. I had to be home in the summer by the time the streetlights were on. That was the rule. And my mother was probably an overprotective mother. Today, she would look neglectful. And so these kids are over-controlled, over-expected. They live in a virtual world a third of their waking hours. And there's no social emotional growth there. And so I've hugged so many kids, Laura, who are 15, 16, or 17 years old chronologically, but who emotionally are 11, 12, or 13. These kids are afraid of failure, however they define that. They live in fear of that. They live in fear of disappointing someone.
You know, I'm always struck, Justice Broderick, when I hear your own family story by how you say so often, we all made mistakes. How did you come to that place of understanding and forgiveness?
I want to tell you a very brief story that answers that question directly. I love my son, and I failed him in a lot of ways. I see that now. And I was having dinner. My son was in prison, and I was having dinner with someone I didn't see often. It was a cold night. I wasn't back to work yet. I wasn't even driving. And he said to me, "Do you mind talking about it, John?" And of course, I didn't want to talk about it, but I respected him a great deal, so I opened up. And anyway, he left the table. Said, "I have to leave the table." His eyes were wet. And he came back, and I'm a Catholic, so I had a lot of Catholic guilt associated with opening up to him. I said, "I upset him. I shouldn't have done that." So he came back, and I said, "Jack, I didn't mean to upset you." I said, "I've forgiven my son." And this guy who was crying leaned into me, and he said, "Forgiven him for what?" I knew what he meant. And I said, "Well, forgive him for what happened to me." He said, "John, he didn't do that to you. He wasn't well." And my wife picked me up that night. I thanked him multiple times. I said to Patty on the way home, I said, "Jack taught me a lesson tonight, that understanding is harder than forgiveness. Forgiveness is easy to say, understanding is harder to do." And so I now understand mental health problems. I understand the mistakes we made in dealing with them, not for what they were, but for what others told us they might be. And I regret that. And the work I've been doing over the last 5 years of my life is the most important work I've ever done. And, I don't usually wish I was younger. Maybe I should, but I usually don't. But I wish I were younger now, because I really am on a mission to change the conversation, to change the culture, and ultimately to encourage people to ask the right questions and to build a mental health system. The way we treat mental illness in the United States, Laura, 2021, is immoral. It's immoral. And we don't have a system. A lot of these people who are suffering could be successfully treated. That's what I want people to know too.
Well, I definitely want to ask you about, the mental health system, because I know you have a lot to say about that. But I'm so struck, Justice Broderick, by um, forgiveness and understanding are two different things, and understanding is really important. So your friend did give you a gift there. How hard do you think it is for most people to reach that place of forgiveness and understanding? As your friend said, he didn't
Well,
do that. It was his illness.
I think, Laura, if somebody broke into my house and stole all my belongings, and I was blameless, that might be harder. But I wasn't blameless. I was well intended. But looking back, knowing what I now know, I think I made things worse than they should have been. I say every time I go out, by the way, I failed my own child. So I'm not here to say you should be smart like me. I'm not trying to be righteous, but I am trying to give people permission to say me too, or my family too. Um, that's what I'm really committed to doing. And it is the single most purposeful thing I have ever done. And I spoke in March of this year to the head of mental health at Emory University. He's pulls for Rosalynn Carter Chair in mental health. Very impressive, late 50s psychiatrist. I asked him a question I thought was simple. I said, how would you rate the mental health system in the United States, March 2021, 1 being not very good, 10 being the gold standard? He said, "John, I can't answer that." I said, "Can I ask you why?" He said, "Oh, sure." He said, "We don't have a mental health system in the United States. We have fragments, we have a patchwork. If you live on either coast and you have money and can afford private pay, you'll find someone. Everyone else, good luck." Contrast that, Laura, with a 15-year-old kid today who falls and breaks his leg or her leg. The adults in their world call 911. An ambulance comes to your house or the athletic field. They take them to the ER, they treat them, and it's probably all covered by insurance. If you have a 15-year-old child, 1 out of 5 kids in America has a mental health problem. If you have a 15-year-old child with a mental health problem, who do you call? When do they see you? Who pays for that and for how long? We shouldn't be asking those questions anymore.
What's your message, Justice Broderick, to those who don't have experience with mental illness, either themselves or in their own circle of loved ones, who might think, well, that's too bad, but it's not really my problem. Doesn't affect me.
The funny thing, Laura, it is a problem. Um, it's probably someone in their immediate family, their close friend, their close friend's child or spouse, someone they work with or next to. It's a common everyday, everywhere problem. And one of the disincentives, and I say this every time I go out, is that we need to let other people know that it's okay not to be okay. It's just not okay to pretend you're okay. And sometimes people just want to talk to you. And they talk to me. I'm a total stranger. I'm the grandfather they've never met. I'll bet some of these kids tell me stuff they don't tell their own parents. The other day, by the way, I'll close with this. I appeared with Charlie Olson, who's an amazing 11-year-old. He's the kid governor of New Hampshire. His term ends in January. And his platform at age 11 was mental health.
I remember.
Ending the stigma. And so one of the adults in the room the other day asked Charlie what he would expect of adults if he talked about mental health. And he said, well, adults tend to want to fix problems. He said mothers especially want to fix problems. But he said, really, sometimes I'm not asking people to fix anything. I'm just asking them to listen to me and hear what I'm saying and be supportive of me. And that message from an 11-year-old really resonated with me. And that, I think, is why kids open up to this guy that they're never going to see again. But in those minutes, they know that they connected and understood them. And sometimes it's not more complex than that. So we need to learn what the signs are. This campaign, Laura, that I've been involved in, Dartmouth has made it possible. These are the 5 most common signs of mental illness. I've given out 470,000 of these 8-cent rock cards. And I say to people, put them on your refrigerator, learn the signs, talk to your family members or your friends, and don't be afraid to say, are you sure you're okay? You don't seem like yourself. Everything okay? It's that awkward question that we have to ask that we haven't asked for generations.
Well, and we definitely have links to this interview to all the work that you've done, including, of course, that Know the 5 Signs and so forth. So that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to ask you a couple personal questions, Justice Broderick, if I could. As you said earlier, you've been doing this work for 5 years. How has your presentation changed over time?
How have I changed over time?
How has your presentation changed over
Well,
time?
my
Maybe it hasn't changed over time.
No, you know something? It's interesting you ask that. My presentation hasn't changed. My impatience has increased. I'm patiently impatient, but I'm getting more impatient over time. I'm impatient for change. When I started this campaign 5 years ago, Laura, I wanted people to know what I had not known, which is here are the 5 common signs, and here's how you should react to them. But over time, and after thousands, literally, of hugs from strangers, which have really touched me, I realized that we owe them more than a nice conversation. We owe them access to treatment when they need it. And so my presentation has not changed, but my message to those who are listening is broader now, which is, would you help me not only change the conversation, but help me build a mental health system in the United States that we can all be proud of. My fear, I say it to kids all the time, I say, I love you guys. You figured it out long before I did, but we don't have a mental health system yet. And I don't want to be in the photograph 25 years from now, photographing today, when people say, did they really treat mental health like that at one time? I don't want to be caught up in that undertow. And so I have changed my impatience level. I want change, and I want meaningful change. It starts with a conversation. It will end with a system.
What have you learned yourself, Justice Broderick, doing this work?
It's been the most rewarding work of my life. Uh,
I can
it's
tell,
been,
yeah.
well, it is. It's exhausting emotionally, but it's exhilarating. It's the most purposeful thing I've ever done. I said to you, I don't often wish I were younger. I wish I were younger now, because I would devote the rest of my life to this. And that seems pretty aggressive because I'm one person, but I would never have thought when I started that I would have spoken to 130,000 people in 5 states. I've given the same closing argument 675 times now to kids of all ages and adults of all ages. There's not a room, Laura, in America where you could go in and give my talk where people would say, why is she talking about that? That's not relevant to me.
Everybody
It's
gets
relevant
it, yeah.
every room in the United States. I want to make it relevant enough for change to happen. We need to change.
What's your best advice for others, Justice Broderick, about embracing an important cause or a passion in an encore career as you have done?
Well, you want to know something? I thought I had found my passion as a lawyer. I wanted to be a trial lawyer when I was in the 7th grade, and I did that. I never aspired to be a judge, but I did that for 15 years. I never would have thought I would have been dean of a law school or start the Rubman Center, which I did with the help of others. Um, and then I found this, or it found me, would be a better way to describe it. Um, One of the things I've done, one thing I've done well in my life, there may not be many, but there are some. And one of the things I've always done is open the door when I hear a knock. And when I was asked by Bill Gunn, formerly head of behavioral health at Concord Hospital, and Peter Evers, who I love, to get involved in this, it was the last thing I would have thought of. But I thought, well, maybe that would make a difference. It's become the engine of my life. I mean, it's hard to describe it otherwise. Everything I did before this was enormous privilege and a lot of responsibility, and I loved it. So don't misunderstand me. I wished I was doing this 20 years ago, because I wouldn't have stopped. I mean, I know me, and I would have said, we got to keep talking about it. We got to keep moving the needle on this. There are just too many people out there who are alone and afraid and unable to get help, who can't afford help. It's immoral, Laura. It's not just unpleasant, it's immoral. And that's what I'm trying to talk about. And I know we can fix it, but not if we don't start it, not if we don't have that conversation.
So, after your family's very challenging, and because you were a Chief Justice, very public struggle with mental illness, you were approached by professionals in this field who said, we want you to go even more public. We want you to start this campaign with us. Is that how that happened, Justice Broderick?
Uh, I, I was really shocked that it happened because I didn't talk about it much. I'm a baby boomer, not that you could attest that. And so the world I'm from, it was just a well-kept secret. Obviously, in our family's case, it was more public. But so many people over the years had come up to me, Laura, gas stations, grocery stores, and would start talking. And then they would open up about their own brother, cousin, sister, husband, themselves.
Wow.
So I knew it was out there, but I didn't know how widespread. And so when I got the call from Bill Gunn, I was driving to the Seacoast, and he said, I'd like you to co-chair it with me. And maybe I should have thought longer, but I liked Bill Gunn, and I knew it was important. And I hadn't really dealt with it, if you know what I mean. When you bury things, you bury them alive. And so I said yes, not knowing where it would go, not knowing what it would mean. It was the best acceptance I ever had. I'm grateful to Bill Gunn and to Peter Evers.
Wow. So, in terms of that, others thinking about an encore career, thinking about a passion they might want to pursue, you seem to be saying, Justice Broderick, listen for the knock, and when you hear it, open the door.
Yes, I'll tell you, Laura, if you said to me tomorrow, you don't have to give one more talk, you can go to the beach and you can play golf or whatever you want to do, I'd go crazy.
Yeah.
I really would. I mean, I'm just how I'm wired. But So everyone has a different passion and purpose. But when I was 67 years old, as hokey as this may sound, it's true. I found my purpose in life, and it's this. And all the things that I did before that prepared me to do what I'm doing now. And in some ways, some of those prior positions made it possible for people to invite me without having to worry who this guy is who's coming into our school. So I think it ties together. I think my son nailed it, actually. And I'm grateful for it. And I'm going to keep doing it as long as people keep inviting me. And Dartmouth, thanks to Dartmouth Hitchcock, I'm free. I'm the cheapest state in New Hampshire. I don't charge.
Well, Justice Broderick, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your time, your thoughts, your stories, and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Laura, thank you. It's great to be on with you, by the way. I mean that sincerely. And thanks for the interview, and thanks to Tom Sedoric and the Sedoric Group for making this possible. I hope it influences someone to action.
I hope that everyone will join us for the next episode of Beyond Your Balance Sheet from the Sedoric Group of Steward Partners. Keep your eyes on this website for more information about future topics. I'm Laura Kanoy, and thanks for being with us.